But amidst this standoff at Doklam, as India stares the dragon down, China is using its trusted weapon, the Chinese media and its mind games. So the Chinese media has fired the Hindu bullet at New Delhi, accusing Prime Minister Narendra Modi's election of fueling Hindu nationalist sentiment, not only to come to power, but to take the two countries to a brink of war. It claims that this nationalist fervor demands revenge or tough action both against Pakistan and China. The Chinese media, of course, has been warmongering since the standoff began at Doklam. But this latest article in Global Times now accuses Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government to curb violence against Muslims. But in Parliament, Sushma Swaraj, the External Affairs Minister, set the record straight.
Dragon using its state media to drum up a shrill war cry. The latest attack is directly aimed at Prime Minister Modi. Chinese state-owned media firing the communal card to attack India this time. The Dragon warning that Hindu nationalism may push India into war with China. Clearly, India's tough talk and firm stance has left the Dragon rattled. Chinese media admitting as much, whining that the new Modi regime is tougher on them. India opening counterfire after China's repeated provocations. In the Rajya Sabha, External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj taking a clear stand on the month-long Doklam standoff. China cannot change the status quo at the Tri-Junction unilaterally. The External Affairs Minister echoing what Defence Minister told India today.
भूटान ने ही स्वयं स्पष्ट कर दिया कि यह हमारी जमीन है और जो प्रेजेंट स्टेटस को है हमारी जमीन का, चाइना उसको ऑल्टर करने की कोशिश कर रहा है। तो मुझे लगता है कि इसके बाद विषय एकदम स्पष्ट हो गया है।
But the Dragon won't back off. State-owned newspaper The Global Times has attacked Prime Minister Modi and Hindu nationalism, warning of a war.
Even as the standoff at Doklam now enters its second month, the very shrill rhetoric from China continues. Possibly one of the hardest statements till date from a Chinese diplomat who was once in India and now retired, Liu Youfa, saying to state broadcaster in China that India's troops had only three options. Either they withdraw, or they would be captured, or they maybe would get killed.
Chinese media continues its war rhetoric. India needs more than tough words and a firm resolve to win this mind game. With Geeta Mohan and Gaurav Sawant in Delhi and Anand Krishnan in Beijing, Bureau Report, India Today.
The government has made its stance very clear. The opposition, the Congress party, is asking if the government has a concrete plan to take on China. Let's listen in to the Congress party spokesperson Randeep Singh Surjewala.
We deeply respect Shrimati Sushma Swaraj, both as a parliamentarian and as a minister. She in May 2015 made a similar statement about terrorist Lakhvi that there will be no talks with Pakistan until it is handed over to India. And then she discarded her own statement. We hope that this statement will not end up in the same fashion. PM should come forward as the first citizen of India and assure the Parliament, have a wide-ranging discussion on Parliament, address all the concerns of all parliamentarians and tell the country that everything that needs to be done on national security as also the standoff on Indo-China border is being done.
Now, when China talks of Hindu nationalism that is putting the two countries on the brink of war, that's not the only statement that comes from China, which is a part of their mind games. Their mind games have been continuing from day one. Remember, they attacked Prime Minister Narendra Modi's meeting with the US President Donald Trump on the 27th of June. They said catastrophic results if New Delhi works with Washington DC. That was the Global Times. Then they warned of a bitter war on the 5th of July. India faces greater losses than in 1962, claimed the Global Times. Then enter JNK threat. This was on the 9th of July when they said a third country's army may enter Jammu and Kashmir at Pakistan's request. This was a Chinese think tank. Then the fourth provocation, again fresh rhetoric, war rhetoric that came on the 18th of July. They said that India's provocation will trigger an all-out confrontation. Again, this shrill rhetoric came from the Global Times. Then, this very specific attack on Prime Minister Narendra Modi that's happened today on the 20th of July, where Chinese media claims that Hindu nationalism, Prime Minister Narendra Modi was elected because of this Hindu nationalism, that's spurring him forward, and that is why he's taking a hard line both on China and Pakistan. And according to Global Times, that may push India and China on the brink of war. Government sources say all of this just mind games. The Chinese mind games continue. In the Global Times, an article has been published that says the election of Prime Minister Narendra Modi has fueled the country's nationalist sentiments. Modi took advantage of rising Hindu nationalism to come to power. Joining me now on this broadcast is India Today's Anant Krishnan, live from Beijing. With me here in the studio is Professor Kamal Mitra Chinoy, Professor of International Studies at the prestigious Jawaharlal Nehru University. Also with me is Professor Rakesh Sinha of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. But Anant, I want to understand from you, is this the voice of the Chinese government?
Well, Gaurav, that's a good question. I'd say the Global Times isn't always the voice of the Chinese government, but on some occasions it is, which is what makes it slightly tricky. But this argument is really bizarre and peculiar. So in that sense, I wouldn't take it very seriously, given that it seems to be part of a larger ploy of China trying to find reasons rather than its own altering of the status quo to explain the standoff in Doklam. And the very fact that they're now turning to Hindu nationalism as a cause for the Doklam standoff, I think it shows a bit of desperation among Chinese experts, if not the Chinese government, in trying to sort of pin the blame on outside factors, even though the real question is the standoff, as we know and have been reporting, started off with a road that was being built into a territory that Bhutan sees as its own.
And Government of India today made that very clear. But Professor Chinoy, I want to understand from you, sir, what do you make of Global Times saying this is Hindu nationalism and this could fuel a war or a conflict between India and China?
Look, slightly less than 80% of our population is Hindu. If they were, say, it is Hindutva nationalism or something, one could understand. But Hindu nationalism can also be taken just to mean that there are, amongst the groups that are nationalists, there is also 80% of Hindus, just like there are nationalist Muslims and nationalist other communities, national tribes and so forth. So I think what Global Times is trying to show is that India is moving from its secularism to do something else. Now, despite aberrations, that is certainly not happening.
Okay.
And that is what is angering them. And they're now trying to find something else to attack us with, to weaken our resolve on our political and military stances.
That's a very important point you're making. China is playing mind games. They're trying to attack us, put us on the back foot. Professor Rakesh Sinha, does India have reason to be concerned in case a Chinese editorial says that this is Hindu nationalism and this Hindu nationalism is hampering democracy, diplomacy, and that is why Delhi is demanding a tougher action, especially towards Pakistan and China? Professor Sinha.
I think there is no difference between China and Pakistan as far as the understanding of Hindu nationalism is concerned. We are not liable to respond them. We are not liable to answer them. Who are they? They are not United Nations. They are asking some question to us. They are not a democratic country. China is a totalitarian country where 80,000 people are killed every year. Average 80,000 dissidents. Those who are raising democratic voice, those who give dissent to the system at the local level, state level or the national level. And moreover, 15,000 Muslims were killed because they wanted to revive their religion. So China does not have right to preach anything to India. Second most important thing, their understanding of Hindu nationalism is based on exclusion. Our understanding of Hindu nationalism is based on inclusion. This is inclusive.
Yes.
But moreover, you know, the days of writing essays on India-China relationship is over. Now the days are to rewrite the relationship between the two countries, and we have to. We cannot rely on the negotiation mendicancy Please come and do negotiation.
Why is China not negotiating, Professor Kamil Mitra? Good point you made there. Why isn't China negotiating? Both Anant and Professor Sinha are of the view that, and as External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj said, India is on a very strong footing legally.
That's why they're not negotiating. Because since we are on a strong foot in the negotiations, whether it is what we're doing in the South China Seas, the Malabar naval exercises, our borders in the north, all these are situations where we are quite comfortably placed. And therefore they are trying to say they are taking the lead in talking with us. But they're the ones who broke off negotiations, did Doklam, earlier moved in Arunachal Pradesh, and that is not going to work. And as the statistics show, in terms of military strength, in terms of our foreign affairs relationships, in terms of the even our friendship with Russia, who's their friend also, all show that India is diplomatically, politically and militarily well placed.
Okay, militarily, diplomatically, politically, India is very well placed. India is on a strong wicket, and perhaps that is why China is changing the goalpost each time. Because Anant, this time this article says that this border controversy where China is being targeted caters to the demand of Indian religious nationalists, and this perhaps is the most bizarre part of this argument that China is putting forward now.
Yeah, that's right, Gaurav, and I think they're turning the entire argument on its head, in the sense that, as we've been reporting, India has been very sober. Prior to today, an External Affairs Minister, Sushma Swaraj's statement, there was just one statement from the NEA, and in fact, it's the Chinese media that's been whipping up nationalism. So it's very strange for them to say that India is whipping up nationalism, given that we've been reporting for the past 1 month, literally every day there's been a statement from the state media, even from the PLA, even from the foreign ministry, and that has whipped up nationalism here in China. And the real question is, why is it a negotiating tactic? Is it the psychological ops, as we've been reporting? So it's very curious for them to turn the argument on its head, given that it seems China that's been trying to use the nationalism card. They've done that in the past with Japan and the Philippines and South China Sea. It's the first time they're doing that with India. So it remains to be seen what they're trying to get out of it.
Because, Professor Chinoy, what China appears to be doing with the shrill rhetoric is raising the pitch. Isn't it painting itself in a corner? And how does it then climb down? How do both sides climb down? Because Sushma Swaraj made one thing very clear. Both will have to withdraw, and withdraw simultaneously from Doklam.
Look, it's very clear. The Malabar exercises, where Japan and the United States were with the Indian Navy, in the South China Sea, littoral states are saying we will not accept the economic zones you've put forward, and we will not accept certain maritime ways and means to travel on the grounds that you say that this is the South China Seas, meaning China Seas. So they are actually caught in a conundrum, because they claim they want to bring through OBOR and everything else benefits and wealth to the people. But what they are doing, especially in the South China Seas, is actually leaving people to question that actually are we going to gain so much from OBOR? And on the boundary question, what are they going to get?
Yes.
Because you know, they said earlier that this is not 1962.
Correct.
Well, yes, it's not 1962, but in 2017, our relationship with the Russians is much stronger than it was in 1962. And
Absolutely.
Our armaments, our political contacts, our diplomacy is at a completely different height than before.
But is China trying to take advantage of what's happening within the country? And here, Professor Sinha, China says that the Narendra Modi government can do nothing if religious nationalism becomes extreme, as shown in its failure to curb violent incidents against Muslims since he came to power in 2014.
This is sheer frustration of China. You know, respectable Dalai Lama ji visited Arunachal Pradesh. This is unacceptable to China, because China claims Arunachal Pradesh. India is now conscious of the Nathula. India 9 dashed land in South China Sea to Malacca Strait. India is watchful. Now China wants the 1962 status of the government of India. It wants a Indian government should be silent spectator, and it wants that it wants to convert Bhutan as a Tibet. India can't allow. Now we are preparing for Tibetan movement. We are reviving the Tibetan movement. It is not lost. The erosion of from our mind Tibet now is being revived, because Tibet is a very important part. Its liberation is the last of humanity, and I warn China, if any war, China would face disintegration, because the democratic forces of China are much more stronger than in 1989 when China used Chinese government acted as a butcher in Tiananmen Square.
Okay, what we've seen in India is a very measured response, both from the government and from whether it's serving diplomats or retired diplomats or the commentary. Very, very shrill on Chinese side. Now that Professor Rakesh Sinha of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh says the Tibetan movement is being revived, how will China react to something like this?
Look, I think China has a number of small minorities, which includes Xinjiang. And in Xinjiang, there is a Uyghur revolt.
Yes.
Now, if you're going to talk of religious nationalism, then you can say, well, the Uyghurs are Muslims, and therefore it is Muslim nationalism or even Islamic nationalism. So I don't think that this kind of nomenclature will help the Chinese, because though they have a multiplicity of nationalisms, some 89% or more are Han.
Han Chinese, yes.
So the Han Chinese are very much the dominant nationality. We do not have that kind of situation.
Yes.
So I think for the Chinese to accuse us of religious nationalism, we could in turn ask us, where is your democratic nationalism? Where is the democratic rights of the nationalities? And what happened to the Tibetans?
Absolutely. Anant, this is where is China perhaps for once not thinking the way everyone says, Chinese cannot be in a way scrutinized, unscrutable. On the other hand, it's the Indians here that Chinese aren't able to read as effectively, because if India hits back with the Tibetan card or asks about democracy in China, that's where Chinese will be on a very sticky wicket, Anant.
I think that's certainly true, but I should also just add that regarding this argument of nationalism being seen by China as a cause, from my experience, if we leave out the last month of the Doklam standoff, among Chinese officials and generally people in China, there's been a very favorable opinion of the Narendra Modi government and the way they've been doing business. They've opened up to China as well. So I think the global challenge is in part rabble-rousing, because they know that this is intended for a foreign audience and they're trying to sort of do a little bit of psychological warfare. So in that sense, I don't think it's a very representative view of how many people in China have looked at the Narendra Modi government as somebody they can do business with. So I think we should just put that qualifier in. But then very quickly, just as you said, I think it's certainly true that in some sense, it's very curious that India has been very silent. I know the Indian government has been criticized by some people for not being more vocal, but I think there's a lot of steps in what they're doing. Given that the shrill rhetoric is coming from China, there's no need for India to replicate in kind.
Professor Chuna, is India's stance correct? As External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj said in Parliament, China tried to change status quo. India went there to stop that along with Bhutan. So it's for both India and China to simultaneously withdraw and come on the negotiating table.
But I think it's also important for us to use our very good contacts with Russia to act as an intermediary. China is using Pakistan, and our ability to negotiate with the Pakistanis, despite Prime Minister Modi's efforts, has not worked out. So let us play the Russian card, and in the South China Seas, play the cards of all the littoral states.
Yes.
And show that because it's called South China Seas, that they cannot say it's all for themselves. Just like when the USS Enterprise was sent in December 1971 into the Bay of Bengal, we didn't say that there were American seas.
Yes.
So if they want to play hardball, we should make the alliances. And I think we should also talk to the Chinese in back-channel diplomacy and say, look, you're investing in Africa through BRICS. We're also investing in Africa through BRICS. Where is the irreconcilable activity or talks that you're talking about? We should talk. We should modify our position so that we can move collectively in BRICS and in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, of which we are all members.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, he's headed for Beijing on the 27th and 28th of July for the BRICS National Security Advisors meet. So Will there be a pull aside? Will there be some kind of talks with Yang Jiechi on the boundary issue, on this issue? That remains to be seen. But one thing is very clear. India is very firm. India is not blinking. And in this standoff, it's a game of nerves where both sides, for now, are holding their nerves. Many thanks for joining me on the broadcast.